Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Marcus Aurelius. How many times have you promised yourself that this would be the season you finally changed, only to watch the old version of you quietly take over again a few days later? Most adults are not short on desire, they are short on structure. They do not fail because they never cared. They fail because they try to rebuild their lives while still being ruled by mood, pressure, distraction, and exhaustion. Motivation is not enough. Your mood is not a plan. Stoicism still matters because it speaks directly to that problem. It does not ask you to become cold. It asks you to become clear. It teaches you to separate what belongs to your choice from what does not. Then place your effort where it can actually shape your character. Most people are not defeated by one huge mistake. They are slowly shaped by repeated, unexamined habits. Change looks emotional from the outside, but from the inside, it is usually practical, repeated, and quiet. That is why Marcus Aurelius is the right place to begin. His life proves that inner change does not begin when circumstances become easy. It begins when a person decides to govern himself in the middle of difficulty. He was not living in peace or comfort. He was carrying the weight of war, political instability, and a deadly epidemic across the Roman world. Yet instead of letting pressure harden him into bitterness or passivity, he kept returning to one task, correcting his own mind, his own conduct, and his own responses. That is what makes meditation so powerful. It is not a book of abstract ideas written from safety. It is the record of a man actively trying to remain disciplined, rational, and morally grounded while life kept testing him. Britannica notes that these writings were composed during military campaigning, not during retreat or ease, and that Book 2 was written at Carnuntum. That matters because it destroys one of the most common excuses people make. We tell ourselves we will become better when life calms down, when stress fades, when the timing improves. But real change usually begins in the middle of unfinished problems, not after they disappear. You do not need a perfect season. You need a steadier self. So if you are serious about changing yourself, do not start with a dramatic promise. Start with practice. Start with 7 habits that are small enough to live, strong enough to hold, and honest enough to change the way you meet your own life. 1. Start the day by defining what is within your control. The first habit of a person who truly wants to change is to stop living on automatic. Most people wake up and immediately hand their mind over to noise, notifications, deadlines, opinions, unfinished worries, and the emotional residue of yesterday start speaking before they do. Then they wonder why they feel scattered before the day has even begun. Stoicism offers a different opening move. Before you give your attention to the world, take a moment to decide where your energy actually belongs. Ask yourself 3 simple questions. What is in my control today? What is not in my control today? And how do I want to show up, no matter what happens? Clarity creates strength. This habit matters because a large part of adult suffering comes from trying to manage what was never ours to command in the first place. We try to control other people's reactions, the timing of results, the way the past should have unfolded, and the image others hold of us. We replay conversations and imagine better outcomes. We chase certainty where none exists. And because none of these things can be fully controlled, the mind becomes tense, irritated, and exhausted. You cannot steer the weather. When your peace depends on other people behaving exactly as you want, you are giving your stability away before the day even starts. Stoic thinking brings you back to a harder but freer truth. You do not need control over everything to live well. You need control over your judgments, your choices, and your actions. That is where character is built. That is where self-respect is protected. And that is where change becomes real. If you have a difficult meeting, your job is not to make sure everyone likes you. Your job is to speak clearly, listen carefully, and remain honest under pressure. If your family is going through conflict, your task is not to force the whole situation to resolve on your schedule. Your task is to respond without pettiness, without panic, and without abandoning your values. Your response is your power. This way of living is practical because it immediately reduces inner friction. Instead of wasting energy on outcomes you cannot secure, you direct it toward conduct you can stand behind. That shift changes the emotional tone of an entire day. You become less reactive because you are no longer treating uncertainty as a personal insult. You become less bitter because you stop expecting life to obey your preferences. And you become more disciplined because every morning starts with a deliberate act of self-command. There is also something deeply honest about beginning the day this way. It forces you to stop pretending that change is mainly about feeling inspired. Most of the time, change is about remembering your role. Your role is not to control the whole story. Your role is to play your part well, to speak with integrity, to keep your word, to do the next right thing even when your emotions want drama, avoidance, or blame. Own the helm each morning. That is the kind of practice that slowly transforms a person from unstable to steady. Try this in a concrete way tomorrow morning. Sit still for 2 minutes before touching your phone. Name one thing you fear, one thing you cannot control, and one thing you will do well anyway. Maybe the fear is rejection. Maybe the uncontrollable fact is someone else's opinion. Maybe the choice you still own is to be prepared, calm, and respectful. This sounds small, but mental directions shape behavior. A day that begins with intention is less likely to collapse into reaction, and a life built on that pattern slowly becomes less chaotic because you stop asking the world to give you peace and start practicing the habits that create it from within. 2. Pause before your first emotion. An adult who has grown older but not inwardly stronger usually lives at the mercy of the first emotional wave. Someone gives correction and they become defensive. Someone touches their pride and they argue back. Something does not go their way and they collapse into frustration, silence, or self-pity. This pattern feels natural, but it is expensive. It damages trust, weakens judgment, and makes a person easy to disturb. Stoicism begins with a difficult recognition. Your first feeling is real, but it is not always reliable. The first reaction is not the final truth. That is why the second habit is so powerful. Create a pause between what happens to you and what you do next. Only a few seconds can change the direction of a whole day. A relationship can be protected in that pause. A career decision can be rescued in that pause. A reckless message can remain unsent in that pause. A harsh sentence that would wound someone you love can die there before it leaves your mouth. Most damage in life does not come from evil intent. It comes from ungoverned immediacy. People act while they are flooded, then spend hours, weeks, or years cleaning up what a few unmanaged seconds destroyed. This is where Stoicism is often misunderstood. It does not teach emotional numbness. It does not tell you to suppress pain until you become cold and unreachable. It teaches self-rule. It asks you not to hand your life over to a temporary state of mind. Anger, embarrassment, fear, and hurt all arrive with urgency. They speak like commanders. They tell you to answer now, defend now, withdraw now, punish now. But urgency is not wisdom. You do not have to obey the first voice. If you always act at the speed of emotion, you will keep building a life that reflects your impulses more than your values. So how do you practice this in real life? Make the pause concrete. When something hits you hard, do not reply immediately. Breathe once, slowly. Name what is happening inside you. Not the story, the feeling. Anger, shame, fear, hurt, disappointment. This matters because unnamed emotion controls you more easily. Once you name it, you create a little distance between the feeling and the self. Then ask a better question. If I act from this emotion right now, what will it produce? Will it clarify or inflame? Will it protect something valuable or damage it? Will I still respect this response tomorrow? Name it before you feed it. Think about how often people ruin good moments because they cannot survive a brief emotional sting. A manager gives feedback, and instead of hearing what is useful, the employee hears humiliation and shuts down. A partner says something clumsy, and instead of asking for clarity, the other person attacks the intention behind it. A friend forgets to respond, and the mind turns silence into rejection. In each case, the event is not the whole problem. The interpretation arrives fast, emotional, and exaggerated. The Stoic pause interrupts that exaggeration. It lets you separate what happened from what your wounded pride is adding to it. This habit becomes even more important when life is stressful. Pressure shortens patience. Fatigue makes emotion louder. Insecure periods make the ego more fragile. That is exactly why disciplined people do not wait to practice calm only when life feels calm. They train for difficult moments before those moments arrive. They know that composure is not a personality trait, it is a practiced skill. Calm is trained, not gifted. The more you interrupt blind reaction, the more stable your inner world becomes. Not perfect, not emotionless, but governed. Over time, this changes your character in ways people can feel. You become safer to talk to because not every difficult conversation turns into a battle. You become wiser under pressure because you stop confusing intensity with truth. You become stronger because you can carry discomfort without instantly discharging it onto someone else. Life does not become easier. People do not stop being disappointing. You do not stop getting hurt. But you stop making every emotion the driver of your actions. That small space between feeling and action is where dignity returns, where judgment wakes up, and where a more mature self finally begins. That is the real aim here. Not to feel less, but to be ruled less. Not to become detached from life, but to become steady inside it. The person who learns to pause before the first emotion does not gain a quieter world. They gain a steadier hand within a noisy one. And that is often the difference between a person who keeps repeating the same damage and a person who is finally ready to change. 3. Build discipline in small things before you dream of big change. Many people say they want a different life, but they keep disrespecting the small behaviors that shape the life they already have. They sleep at random hours. They work only when they feel like it. They make promises to themselves and then quietly ignore them. They spend to soothe emotion. They delay the task they know matters. Then, after weeks or years of living this way, they ask why nothing truly changes. The Stoic view is painfully clear on this point. Character is not formed in rare dramatic moments. It is formed in repeated daily actions. Small actions reveal the self. That is why the third habit is self-discipline in small things, not glamorous discipline, not public discipline, not the kind people post and celebrate. Quiet discipline, private discipline. The kind that reduces the endless inner debate that wastes so much of a person's life. Most people are tired not because life is always too hard, but because they negotiate with themselves all day. Should I get up now or later? Should I do the hard task now or avoid it a little longer? Should I save this money or reward myself again? Should I read, prepare, stretch, and focus? Or should I escape into comfort one more time? A scattered life is often a life ruled by too many private bargains. Stoicism pushes you toward a stronger standard. Do not wait until you feel ready to act well. Act well often enough that it becomes more natural than delay. The goal is not to become harsh with yourself. The goal is to become dependable to yourself. Discipline is self-respect in action. When you begin keeping small promises, something important happens inside you. You stop seeing yourself as someone full of potential but weak in practice. You begin This is why vague goals rarely transform anyone. Saying I want to be more positive, more focused, or more successful sounds good, but it does not ask much of your actual day. A specific behavior does. Wake up when you said you would. Finish the hardest task before noon. Do not complain about the same problem more than once. Write down your spending every evening. Read 10 minutes instead of scrolling mindlessly for 30. Clean the room before resting. Answer the difficult email before opening entertainment. Make the standard visible. The more concrete the action, the less room your excuses have to hide. These small disciplines matter because they train identity, not just productivity. Anyone can act serious for a few days when emotion is high. The real question is what you do when the mood is gone, when nobody is watching, when comfort is closer than effort, and when the task is too small to impress anyone. That is where self-command is built. Every time you follow through on a small obligation, you reinforce a private truth. I am not ruled by every impulse. I can choose what matters over what feels easy. Repetition becomes character. Over time, the effect is much deeper than external efficiency. Your confidence becomes less theatrical and more grounded. You trust yourself more because you have evidence, not fantasy. You procrastinate less because the mind has learned that avoidance is no longer the default response. You feel less chaotic because daily structure removes unnecessary friction. Most of all, you stop waiting for a future version of yourself to rescue you. You become that person by training in ordinary moments. So before you chase a new identity, examine your smallest routines. They are not beneath transformation. They are the real work. The person who learns to govern bedtime, attention, spending, speech, and follow through is already changing at the root, long before the world notices anything different on the surface. 4. Deliberately choose small discomforts to build strength. Modern adults are often weakened by constant convenience without even realizing it. Everything is designed to reduce friction, shorten waiting, soften effort, and protect us from discomfort. That sounds helpful, but there is a hidden cost. When a person gets too used to ease, even ordinary difficulty starts to feel unbearable. One rejection feels like proof of inadequacy. One inconvenient day feels like life is falling apart. One uncomfortable conversation feels like something to avoid at all costs. The problem is not that these people are weak by nature. The problem is that they have not trained themselves to stay steady inside discomfort. Comfort can make you fragile. Stoicism offers a practical answer. Do not wait for hardship to arrive before learning how to endure it. Prepare yourself in advance through small, chosen forms of inconvenience. Not to punish yourself, not to romanticize suffering, and not to turn discipline into performance. The purpose is simpler and more honest. You are teaching your mind that discomfort is not danger, that difficulty is not always damage, and that you are far less fragile than your habits have led you to believe. Train before life tests you. This matters because fear grows strongest around what you keep avoiding. If you always choose the easiest path, the most comfortable setting, the quickest pleasure, and the least demanding version of every task, your tolerance slowly shrinks. Then, when life presents something hard, which it always does, you meet it with panic instead of steadiness. You do not just dislike discomfort. You become dependent on its absence. That is a dangerous way to live, because reality is not built to protect your preferences. Plans fail, people disappoint, bodies get tired, progress becomes slow. The Stoic response is not resentment, it is preparation. You can practice this in modern, safe, realistic ways. Do one useful thing you do not feel like doing. Walk when it would be easier to avoid movement. Delay an unnecessary pleasure instead of obeying it immediately. Say no to an impulse that adds nothing to your life. Stay with the awkwardness of learning a new skill instead of quitting the moment you feel clumsy. Finish a difficult conversation calmly instead of escaping from it. None of this is extreme. That is exactly the point. You are not trying to prove toughness through spectacle. You are quietly increasing your capacity to remain functional when life is not pleasant. Discomfort is not an emergency. The deeper value of this habit is that it reduces the power of fear. Every time you voluntarily enter a manageable difficulty, you send a message to yourself. I can survive this. I can stay here. I do not need immediate relief to remain whole. That message matters. A person who never trains discomfort begins to believe that feeling uneasy means something is wrong. A person who trains it begins to understand that uneasiness is often just the price of growth, honesty, patience, or discipline. Voluntary hardship builds inner proof. That inner proof becomes a real source of confidence because it is based on lived experience, not positive thinking. There is also a moral strength in this practice. When you stop demanding softness from life at every moment, you become less entitled and less easily offended by reality. You complain less. You recover faster. You stop interpreting every obstacle as a personal attack. You begin to respect effort more because effort is no longer something you only admire in theory. You know what it feels like. You know what it costs. And because of that, you become more patient with the slow, sometimes uncomfortable work of becoming better. In time, this changes your relationship with life itself. You no longer need ideal conditions to function well. You no longer assume that a hard day means you are failing. You stop asking the world to feel soft before you agree to be strong. That is a major shift. It means your peace is no longer built on smooth circumstances. It is built on practiced resilience. So, choose a little difficulty on purpose, not because pain is noble, but because dependence on comfort is dangerous. The person who can stay composed through a small inconvenience today is quietly preparing to face much larger trials tomorrow with dignity, steadiness, and self-command. 5. Review yourself each night instead of judging everyone else. Many people grow older without becoming more aware because they spend too much time tracking the faults of other people and too little time examining themselves. They notice who was rude, who was unfair, who was careless, who was selfish, who disappointed them, who failed to understand them. And while that constant observation may feel sharp, it rarely produces growth. It produces irritation, superiority, and distraction. Stoicism turns the attention in a harder but more useful direction. Before sleep, review your own day. Look inward before you look outward. This is one of the most valuable Stoic practices because it turns an ordinary day into a lesson instead of leaving it as a blur of reactions. Most people move from one moment to the next without ever pausing long enough to ask what their behavior revealed. They feel, react, justify, repeat. Then they call it personality. Evening reflection interrupts that cycle. It gives you a chance to return to the day with honesty while it is still fresh. Not to rewrite it, not to dramatize it, but to learn from it. A few quiet minutes at night can correct what a whole day of emotional momentum tried to hide. The practice itself is simple. Before going to sleep, ask 3 questions. What did I do well today? Where was I weak? What will I do differently next time? These questions matter because they cover the full picture. The first keeps you from becoming unfairly harsh with yourself. The second keeps you from hiding from your defects. The third prevents reflection from becoming passive regret. Reflection is correction. You are not reviewing the day to feel heavy. You are reviewing it so tomorrow can be lived with more intention than today. That distinction is essential. Reflection is not the same as self-punishment. The goal is not to prove that you are flawed, broken, or behind everyone else. The goal is to see yourself clearly. Only the person who can face a weakness directly has any real chance of changing it. The person who always explains away every failure may preserve comfort for the moment, but comfort is not the same as growth. If you snap at someone and then spend the rest of the night defending your tone, nothing improves. If you admit that pride, fatigue, or impatience got the better of you, then change has somewhere to begin. See clearly, not cruelly. This habit is especially powerful because it shifts your focus from controlling others to governing yourself. You stop asking why people keep making your life difficult, and you begin asking how your own thinking, speech, and choices may be making life harder than it needs to be. That does not mean blaming yourself for everything. It means reclaiming responsibility for the part that belongs to you. There is maturity in that shift. It ends the childish hope that peace will arrive once everyone else behaves better. It reminds you that your deepest work is not to police the world, but to refine your own conduct within it. Over time, this practice changes the texture of your mind. You become less defensive because you are no longer shocked by your imperfections. You become more teachable because honesty has replaced vanity. You become calmer because your mistakes no longer need endless denial. Most importantly, you become more consistent. When you review yourself daily, patterns become visible. You notice where impatience keeps appearing. You see where fear disguises itself as avoidance. You see how often your stress becomes someone else's burden. Patterns reveal what excuses conceal. Once seen clearly, these patterns lose some of their power. If you keep this habit, something quiet but profound happens. Your life begins to change not only because you perform better, but because you become more truthful with yourself. That truthfulness is not dramatic, it is steady. It does not flatter you, but it frees you. And in the long run, a person who can end each day with honest self-examination is far more likely to grow than one who spends every evening replaying the failures of everyone else without ever truly changing. 6. Choose character over image. One of the strongest temptations in adult life is the temptation to protect an image. People want to be seen as successful, composed, sharp, admirable, and right. They want to look confident in the room, morally clean in the argument, impressive in the career, and emotionally strong in the eyes of others. None of that is unusual. The problem begins when appearance becomes more important than substance. The more a person lives to manage perception, the further that person often drifts from the truth of who they are. Image can become a private prison. Stoicism cuts straight through that illusion. It reminds you that the real work is to build character, not to manufacture impressions. An impression lives in someone else's mind. Character lives in your choices. You do not control whether people misunderstand you, underestimate you, dislike you, or project their own assumptions onto you. But you do control whether you act with fairness, restraint, honesty, courage, and self-command. That is why the Stoic path feels both severe and freeing. It removes the fantasy that you can secure your worth by controlling how you are viewed. It brings you back to the only question that has real weight. What kind of person are you becoming when nobody is applauding? This matters because image is seductive, precisely when you are insecure. When you feel behind in life, you want to look successful. When you feel uncertain, you want to appear certain. When you feel morally compromised, you want to be seen as good. The ego reaches for presentation when the inner life feels unstable. But image management does not repair inner weakness. It only decorates it. What shines is not always sound. A person can look disciplined and still be ruled by vanity. A person can sound wise and still be dishonest in private. A person can be admired publicly and deeply divided inwardly. The Stoic concern is not whether you seem admirable, it is whether your conduct remains worthy, even when admiration disappears. This becomes very practical in daily life. There are moments when admitting fault will make you look weaker in someone's eyes, but stronger in reality. There are moments when turning down an attractive opportunity, because it violates your values, will make you look slower, but leave you cleaner inside. There are moments when silence is wiser than winning an argument, even if walking away makes you appear defeated to someone who only understands dominance. Character often costs image in the short term. That is why so many people avoid it. They would rather protect appearance than pay the price of integrity. But a person who is serious about change has to reverse that instinct. Instead of asking, "How will this make me look?" they begin asking, "What will this make me into?" That is a far harder question because it does not allow easy self-deception. It forces you to judge your decisions by their moral effect, not their social effect. Choose what lets you respect yourself. This is where inner maturity begins. You stop treating other people's approval as the final court of appeal. You begin measuring your life by whether your actions can stand in the presence of your own conscience. There is also a quiet peace that comes with this shift. When you stop trying to control every impression, you waste less energy performing. You become less anxious about being misunderstood. You become less eager to explain yourself to people committed to not understanding. You become less fragile when praise fades or criticism appears. Why? Because your center of gravity has moved. It no longer rests in reputation alone. It rests in conduct. Reputation is unstable. Character is chosen. That does not mean reputation is meaningless. It means it must never become your master. In the end, real change happens when a person stops living like an actor and starts living like a witness to their own soul. The question is no longer whether people think highly of you. The deeper question is whether, after this decision, you can still look at yourself without avoidance. The person who chooses character over image may not always win admiration quickly, but they gain something more durable. They gain inner alignment. And that is one of the clearest signs that someone is no longer merely trying to appear better, but is finally becoming better. 7. Live usefully for others instead of being consumed by yourself. One of the strangest truths about adult life is that the more a person becomes obsessed with how they feel, the more exhausted they often become. The more tightly life revolves around the self, the easier it is to feel irritated, overlooked, and dissatisfied. Every inconvenience feels personal. Every disappointment feels larger than it is. Every emotional shift demands attention. Stoicism offers a very different direction. It does not encourage a life of selfish withdrawal. It teaches that human beings are rational, social, and responsible to something beyond private comfort. You were not made only for yourself. That is why the Saner's 7th habit is so important. Each day, do at least one useful thing that is not centered on your immediate personal gain. It does not have to be dramatic. In fact, it is better when it is ordinary and consistent. Listen to someone with more patience than usual. Do your work with care because another person will depend on its quality. Keep your word so someone else does not have to carry the cost of your carelessness. Help a person who is under pressure. Speak honestly, but with kindness. Make one corner of another person's day slightly lighter because you were in it. These acts may seem small, but they shift the direction of the soul. This matters because self-obsession creates distortion. When you are trapped inside your own feelings all day, everything expands around your discomfort. Your mood becomes the measure of reality. Your preferences become the center of decision-making. Your pain becomes the loudest voice in the room. And that kind of inward spiral rarely leads to peace. It usually leads to fragility. A person who constantly monitors whether they feel appreciated, understood, comfortable, validated, or inspired becomes easier to disturb, not stronger. The self grows louder in isolation. Stoicism interrupts that pattern by reminding you that meaning is often found not in being endlessly attended to, but in being of genuine use. There is something deeply stabilizing about usefulness. When you help, serve, support, or contribute, your attention is no longer trapped inside the narrow cage of your own reaction. You stop rehearsing your grievances for a moment. You stop enlarging every emotional bruise. You remember that your life has value beyond your private moods. That shift is not denial. It is proportion. Your feelings still matter, but they are no longer treated as the only thing that matters. This is especially important in adulthood, because grown people can become quietly miserable when every decision is filtered through comfort, self-protection, and personal image. Living usefully also changes the quality of your character. It makes you less self-pitying because you stop treating your struggle as the only struggle that exists. It makes you less entitled because you begin to see life as a place to contribute, not just a place to receive. It makes you more disciplined because usefulness often requires reliability, patience, and restraint. Value is created through contribution. Anyone can say they want purpose, but purpose is rarely found by staring harder at yourself. More often, it appears while you are doing something that genuinely benefits another human being. This does not mean neglecting your own needs or becoming a martyr for everyone around you. Stoicism is not asking you to disappear. It is asking you to take your place in the human community with maturity. There is a difference. A healthy person can care for themselves and still live beyond themselves. In fact, some of the most grounded people are those who understand that self-development is incomplete unless it makes them more trustworthy, more generous, more honest, and more helpful in real life. A good life must reach beyond the ego, and this is where change becomes deepest. At first, many people want to improve so they can look better, feel stronger, or prove something to themselves or others. But the transformation becomes more serious when the goal shifts. You are no longer changing just to appear impressive. You are changing so your presence becomes more useful, your words become more responsible, and your life becomes more aligned with what is good. That is a stronger reason to grow. It survives bad moods. It survives slow progress. It survives the days when motivation is nowhere to be found. In the end, a person becomes far less trapped when they stop asking all day, "How do I feel?" and start asking more often, "How can I be of use?" That question does not shrink your humanity. It enlarges it, and once that happens, change is no longer just about becoming a better version of yourself. It becomes about becoming the kind of person whose life gives something solid to the world around them. Real change does not begin with a perfect new version of yourself arriving all at once. It begins with habits that are plain, honest, and hard to escape. It begins when you learn to separate what you can control from what you cannot. It begins when you stop letting your first emotion make every decision for you. It begins when you become disciplined in small actions instead of waiting for dramatic motivation. It begins when you stop needing comfort all the time and discover that some chosen difficulty can make you stronger. It begins when you examine yourself at night with honesty instead of spending your energy judging everyone else. It begins when you care more about character than image. And it deepens when your life becomes useful to other people, not just centered on your own feelings. Real change is built in practice. That is the Stoic path for an adult. It is not loud. It is not theatrical. It does not promise instant transformation or endless inspiration. What it offers is something better: stability, clarity, Self-command, a way of living that helps you remain steady in a world that often rewards distraction, reaction, and appearance. A stronger life is a steadier life. You do not need to wait for life to become easier before you begin. You do not need a cleaner past, a calmer week, or a more perfect mood. You only need the willingness to start with one habit, today, and repeat it long enough that it becomes part of who you are. You begin by doing the next right thing. The new self is built, not found. That is how change becomes real. Not as a performance, not as a promise, but as a quiet shift in the way you think, choose, and live every single day.